And welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to business continuity, crisis management, emergency management, all things related to COVID, resilience, and so many more things. It's our monthly chat. I'm going to skip all my usually other things that I say at the beginning. We've got a full agenda today. It's my monthly talk with Regina Phelps. Regina, welcome to the show.
Alex, it is always great to be with you. And my goodness, the time just flies. We're in March already. Oh my gosh.
I know it feels like I just talked to you the other day, and here we are. It's a month
Here we
later.
are. So funny. It's so funny.
Now, let's start off. I know we've got a full agenda, and we were chatting before we actually started filming. There's a whole bunch of things we want to get to. So let's just jump to the nitty gritty first part. Where are we now with
Yeah.
COVID?
Oh, well, happily. It's a mixed bag, and of course, I'm sure you're seeing the reports of what's happening in Europe. They're in pretty serious straits, right? Italy is in lockdown again. Parts of many other countries, the Czech Republic and France and Spain and so on. There's really a lot of virus that is spreading, and a lot of it, of course, is this B.1.1.7, which is the variant from the UK, which is highly transmissible and about 40% more fatal. That's driving this. And because of the slow vaccine rollout in the EU, sadly, that means that the variant is currently winning the race actually in Europe. It's also pretty tough in South America and in particular Brazil, where there's now two variants, the P1 and the P2, that are really ravaging Brazil, and it's now leaking out into other countries in South America. And in the United States, we're kind of on a plateau, and unfortunately, it's a pretty high plateau. Our 7-day average case count's about 55,000. Our deaths now are down below 1,000 on most days, but still very high. And we've been this way for a period of time. And so there's a lot of B.1.1.7 in the United States driving this particular increase. And of course, we're all concerned that, again, we're in a tight race here, and we don't know who's going to quite win yet, the virus or the variant or the vaccine. And I would say to you that it's going to be close. It's going to be really close. And so that's kind of where we are. I'm curious about Canada. I know your vaccine rollout continues to be slow. I saw that you made some pretty good progress in the older population. But before we jump to our next topic, where are you guys at in Canada now?
Well, we are now at 22,600 above that deaths. We have, unfortunately, our next big milestone for cases is going to be 1 million because we're at 933,000 plus cases.
Mm-hmm.
Schools seem to be open all across the country. There are some areas that have been flipping back and forth between gray, which is the worst category you could be in, full
Mm-hmm.
lockdown, gray and red going back and forth there. Toronto seems to be a yo-yo. One, for 2 weeks it's gray, goes into red, then all of a sudden they don't follow things or something, or they say, oh, good, the worst is over, and they flip right back into gray again. So that's happening. In there, I think it's just Toronto or the Greater Toronto area. I forget which one, but they're going to be opening some patios now, which I'm not so sure that's the greatest thing in the world to do.
Is that outdoor dining? Is that what that's
Yeah,
called for you guys?
outdoor
Mhm,
dining.
mhm, mhm.
But the rules kind of are messy. You can only be with your own household unless you're single. Well, then what does that mean? You can be with
Yeah,
anybody,
right.
and
Oh
if you're
yeah, it's
a
messy.
healthcare worker, you can be alone or dine with others as well. So it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
Mhm.
And there's some mixed communications about, you mentioned the vaccine rollouts, and they are having some challenges getting the right messages out because we're hearing different things on the radio.
Mm.
On the weekend, I was driving back from the cottage, and they, in the same, within 10 minutes, one announcement was the province of Ontario, where I am, have now activated a online booking system that people 60 and over, 60 or 65, no, 60, that can now book an appointment to get a vaccine.
Mhm.
10 minutes later, there was another message saying, yes, people 75 and older now can get
Oh
the,
gosh. Oh
the
yeah, right.
So where is it? Because my mother falls in there, and
Mm-hmm,
she
hmm.
has to, because of cancer in her family, she has to go for a mammogram every so often. It's not the 2 year thing or 1 year. It's almost like every 6 months she has to go, but she can't go until she gets the vaccine. Well,
Oh.
because these mixed messages, they're saying she's not eligible for the vaccine, but she has to have this mammogram. So she's now stuck in a loop, unfortunately.
Mm, mm, mm.
And so things are, the vaccines are now starting to come, and it's the delays that we were experiencing getting all those vaccines are now starting to um, work their way through the system, and we're now getting a lot more needles in arms,
Good.
regardless of the 60 or 75, but it's now starting to happen, which is good.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And one little bit of information which I thought I'd pass along, because I didn't think I'd actually see this anywhere. I was checking the government website today, Government of Canada, and one of our maritime provinces, Prince Edward Island,
Mm-hmm.
has 0 deaths, which I didn't think happened in Canada. But I also found that one of our,
Congratulations. That's
yeah,
shocking.
fantastic for the people of PEI. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And we have 3 northern territories: Yukon, which is right against Alaska, uh,
Mm-hmm.
the Nunavut, which is towards Greenland, and in the middle is Northwest Territories. Northwest Territories also has 0 deaths.
That's actually surprising to me.
Yeah, and the other one, the Yukon I mentioned, right beside Alaska, only has one
Wow.
death. So I was,
Congratulations.
it's one death too many out of all of that,
Of
but
course. Of
still, it was
course.
kind of nice to see. Oh, maybe they're doing something really good up there. Fingers
Mm-hmm.
crossed, and the
Mm-hmm.
numbers were so low. So
And is there any conversation in Canada about the United States offering the AstraZeneca vaccine to both Canada and Mexico? Because we have 200 million doses here, and they've just, since we have bought, embarrassingly, we bought so much vaccine here in the United States from Moderna, Pfizer, and J&J that we have enough vaccine on order to basically cover everybody in the U.S.
I know there are conversations going on, and I believe some of the government officials here are talking to people in the U.S., wondering, hey, can we get some of those?
Yeah, apparently it's been offered. Apparently Biden has offered to somehow split it between Canada and
Yeah,
Mexico.
yeah. I've been out of the loop for the last 2-3 days because I was up north at the cottage, so
Oh, good for you.
very poor internet, so I haven't been able to follow up
It's
as
good for
well.
your brain, honey. It's good
Yeah,
for your brain.
but I know those conversations are happening because
It's
people
great.
are concerned, going, "Hey, how come the U.S. has got so much and we can't
Right,
get all this stuff?"
right,
So I
right.
know those conversations are happening right now.
Oh, good, good, good. Because that's important. Well,
Yes.
let me jump, because I want to talk about before we get into sort of our main topic. I wanted to talk with your listeners about new definitions that the CDC and the WHO came out with on variants. And the reason this is important is that variants affect everybody around the world, and there was not good clarity on the definitions between a variant of interest and a variant of concern. And I could never find, everybody sort of said something different. So I'm going to look at my notes here because I want to call out and be very clear. So there are 3 levels now of variants recognized by WHO and CDC, and very likely others will follow. So the variants of interest are the least of the 3, the least threatening of the 3. And the definition is as follows: a variant with specific genetic markers that have been associated with changes in receptor binding, which is the spike protein, reduced neutralization of antibodies, which means that vaccines may not be as effective, and either between vaccines or previous infections, reduced efficacy of treatments like monoclonal antibodies, and potentially diagnostic impacts like a PCR test that may not catch it, and could also be also more transmissible or more serious. So what it's saying is, ooh, this variant's, it's got some bad parts to it. It's not evil, but it's got some bad parts. And there essentially are 3 major variants: 2 from New York, which were discovered in the late winter. And so those are 2. It's B1526 and 1525. And then there's now a new one out of Brazil called P2 that's in this variant of interest. And again, all of those are either more transmissible, more deadly, or impact therapeutics like vaccines and monoclonals.
Right.
But
I was going to mention that I've been hearing on the news here that doctors and hospitals are saying they're seeing more younger people now
Yes,
showing up.
yes,
By younger, I don't mean kids. I mean, 20, 30, 40 year
right,
olds. It's not
right.
just the elderly now.
And actually, that's a characteristic of some of the shift in the new variants, and in particular, the ones out of Brazil are really affecting people between 20 and 40. And so that's another sort of big issue to consider. So there are essentially three of these variants of interest now: two from New York, one from Brazil, the second P2. Then variants of concern, which is a term we're familiar with because that's been around, is one that has more transmissibility, could be more severe, and could impact therapeutics more significantly and has been well documented. And that's where you're getting into the UK variant, the B117, the P1 that we know well from Brazil, and then also the South African one, which is the 1351, B1351, and two of my homegrown ones in California are now called a variant of concern. This is brand new. And these are much more transmissible and believed to be somewhat more deadly. And one of them came from my town, San Francisco, and the other one was from Southern California. So those are the variants of concern, the current ones. Then they added a new category, but no one's living in it yet, which is really good when you hear the definition. It's called the variant of higher consequence. And essentially what this one says in the definition is a variant of high consequence has clear evidence that preventive measures or medical countermeasures, such as vaccines, et cetera, have significantly been reduced to previously circulating viruses. So this is like a virus that is not impacted at all by vaccines, is not impacted by monoclonals, and is much more transmissible and likely deadly. Currently, we don't have any of those, but what I would say to you is that there always is a possibility for that to occur.
I was going to say we have the chance of that, though, because
of course,
here in Ontario, they're saying that there's a chance that we could be starting at the beginning stages of a third wave.
Yes,
and
its
variants. So
I would expect you to be to advance to a third wave, and simply because a couple of things. First of all, is that now that the weather's improving, there's going to be a lot more mixing, very likely. Hopefully outdoors, but still there's going to be a lot more mixing. But secondarily, because these new, more transmissible variants of concern are everywhere, that you are going to very likely experience that, because also your vaccine rollout has been very slow. What could potentially save the US from having a fourth wave, because we're overachievers here. We don't just have 3 waves, we have 4. Right. What could push us to a fourth wave is the B117. And again, I think last time we spoke, I talked a lot about the fact that there is this high potential for a fourth surge in the United States. And one of the things that's happening here in the US is that we are at this plateau, a really high plateau of between 50 and 60,000 cases a day. And that's been our rolling average for some time now. And so what that means is the B117 is continuing to increase in many states, and it keeps pushing those numbers up, even though we have lots of people who are vaccinated. And roughly, if you look at the stats in the US, essentially about 20% of the US has received at least one jab. So either the 2 jabs shots, the Moderna or the Pfizer, or the J&J, which just started rolling out here about 3 weeks ago. So 20%, that's really good, right? And about 30%, more or less, have been infected. So they have some antibodies. And the current studies I've seen just as of last week is that antibodies are believed actually to last at least 8 to 9 months, because now they're doing studies on people that got sick in March and in April and in May of last year, and they still have circulating neutralizing antibodies. So that's all good news. So we still have 50% though of the population that are not vaccinated and haven't been sick. So we still have a lot of wood to burn, so to speak. And so if we get by without a fourth surge, Alex, it's going to be a miracle. And if you've seen any photographs or images of people partying in Florida with spring break, if we live through this, it will be a miracle.
I saw some of those pictures just recently.
Shocking!
I couldn't believe what I was seeing.
Shocking! I I was so shocked. I hadn't seen it. I saw a video I posted on LinkedIn this morning that was in the Wall Street Journal. And it was like the biggest party you've ever seen in your life. And people were, for the most part, maskless and pressed right up against each other. And I thought, oh my God.
And those people are going to go home and spread it to others.
Exactly. And that's the problem about someplace where everybody goes to someplace like Florida. They all are going to go back home. And you know what happens after that.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned warm weather because here we've had unnaturally warm weather for the last 2 weeks.
Really?
Unbelievably, and we will for the next 2 weeks. No snow, no rain. Where I live, we don't have any snow here except for those snow banks that were 20 feet high. There's a little bit left, but for the most part, we have no snow. Even up the cottage, over half of it is gone.
Wow.
And today, with the blue sky and the sun, which is one side of my face being so bright because the sun has now moved, it's coming through the window, but
wow.
There were tons of people outside wandering around.
Yeah.
You mentioned the parks, they were full.
I'm sure packed.
Parents standing around the parks while the kids were playing on the monkey bars and swings and things like that. The dog park was full.
Because that's where you were, right? That's where you were.
Well, I won't take my dog in there because there are so many people in there that aren't wearing masks. And, my dog gets along with everybody, but just in case I have to pull him away, I don't want to be beside somebody who's not wearing a mask.
Right.
So I take him for a walk down the street, but there was just tons of people around because the weather is now warming up.
Yeah. Interesting.
On that note, we've come to the end of our first segment. We're talking with Regina Phelps, and we'll be right back. And welcome back. We are talking today with Regina Phelps. Regina, let's jump into the main topic of the day, offices and people going back to the office and work from home stuff. I know you've got lots of stuff to say about that today. So, for anybody watching on YouTube, we've got slides. So, Voice America listeners, we will mention what we're talking about here. You just can't see the slides. But Regina, over to you.
Okay, good. So this is a really important topic, and I'll tell you, never in my career as a crisis manager, continuity planner, pandemic person, did I really think I'd spend so much time talking about how people are rethinking going back from a perspective of what I call reinvention. But it's probably what I spend a majority of my time talking about today. And by reinvention, it's really the idea of how are you going back? And there's a couple things I think that are important for your listeners to think about. First of all, we really are at a crossroads. I mean, we are kind of like standing at the juncture where you can either go back to your offices as you always have and work as you always have, or you have actually the opportunity to create some sort of a new future. And I think I've said this to your listeners many times, and that is, if we've gone through all of this hell for the last year plus, for you to go back and work as you have always done, to me, seems like the greatest mistake. And you've missed such an incredible opportunity to reimagine your work environment. And so many of my clients have, because they've been out for a year, that are in knowledge workers, right? That they really are starting to deeply question how and when they go back and what it looks like. And that's really what I want to talk about. So I'll talk through a few things and then we'll be dialoguing as we normally do back and forth. So what I tell all of my clients, and this is one of the things I would ask your listeners to really think about, Alex, is there are 3 questions that you should really be thinking about before you even start going back. And what I would say to you is that this, every time I hear somebody say the new normal, I just want to choke them.
I agree.
Because
I hate that.
I hate that. To me, it is our new future, right? It's not going back to what was. It's different. It's different. And if we say new normal, somehow it just seems like it's the same darn thing. And so to me, it is about a new future. And I think that it requires soul searching. And that's really what I've been really begging, frankly, all of my clients to do right now. Because pretty soon, if they don't do this, then all of a sudden they're going to be planning to go back and they didn't know how that even happened. So I asked people to do essentially 3 questions. First of all, what have you learned over the last 12 plus months? And there's 2 ways to slice that. what's really worked for you in this remote work and all the other things that you've done. What's really worked? And I will tell you, many of my clients can produce a long list of things that have worked.
Mhm.
And then the other question really is that what needs improvement? And by that, I mean, where there are things that you did that didn't work and you stopped, or maybe you're still doing them, but you're not happy with it. Or maybe you're concerned about things that are not working as well. So some of my clients talk a lot about company culture and how do you successfully onboard people and all of that kind of stuff. Maybe those kinds of things aren't working. But the first two questions really require some really deep digging. And then the third question requires the deepest digging of all, which to me is, why are you going back? Now, that's not a simple question, even though it sounds pretty simple. What I'm asking people is like, why are you going back? What do you, and that should peel like an onion. Like, well, yeah, to me, well, why are you going back? Well, what are you going to get when you go back that's different from what you're experiencing now? And it's really asking those questions and peeling that onion, because if you can really be clear about what's worked, what's not working, and then what do you get by going back, that will help you determine what the going back should look like. But it does require soul searching, and it should be not just at any one particular level of the company. It should be, I would ask that the senior executives have that conversation, and then the middle folks below them having that conversation, and then even really surveying employees with that conversation, because they're all going to be different, and really understanding that. And it's not just sending out a survey. People sending me, I'm going to send out a survey. Well, yeah, you could do that. But I think it'd be much better if you had conversations, little small groups of people really talking about it.
You don't engage people by doing a survey.
No, you don't. It's an easy way out. You get some data, of course, but I'm really asking people to dig around in the muck here and really have a deep conversation, which may make some people, frankly, a little uncomfortable.
Hmm.
But I think it would be really, and this is something you could do on Zoom. You really could easily. So that's what I'm really asking people to do. And I want to give you an example about one of our clients, and also one of the biggest companies here in San Francisco, where I live, that's just announced their new way of working, and it's Salesforce. Now, Salesforce just built a 107-story building in my town. It is huge. And they announced on February 23rd that there's only going to be 3 ways that you'll be working at Salesforce. One is a flex schedule. That will be like 90% of the staff, 85 to 90% of the staff. 1 to 3 days a week. You go there because you're going there because you can't do things at home. So if you have to collaborate in a meeting, if you have to do a customer meeting, if you have to do a presentation and you need to be at work, it's those kinds of things. And they say that the vast majority, 85+% of their employees are going to be in this flex schedule, 1 to 3 days a week. Then there's people that will be fully remote. The people that will be fully remote are those people that don't live near a Salesforce office. And actually, maybe you and I have talked about this before. There's a fair number of my clients anyway, who have hired people during the pandemic that don't live anywhere near an office. Mm-hmm. And they've been able to get some really good talent because they're drawing from the world, right? Instead of just the Bay Area, as an example, or New York or wherever. And then lastly, there'll be a very small percentage, less than 5%, that would be office-based. And those are people that's again a really tiny number, and it could be like security people, or maybe certain tasks or jobs that need to be really done physically at work. And then now their offices are being completely redesigned to be what are called community hubs. So it's going to be not cube farms. It's going to be breakout spaces, collaborative rooms. It's going to have good ventilation, good air, all of that stuff, which are critical from the disease-related perspective. And they're a really good example of that. And this is a quote from one of Salesforce's key executives, their chief people person, that's an HR person, who said an immersive workspace is no longer limited to a desk in our towers. And they're talking about the 107-story tower. And that you can see in that slide, that 107-story tower is behind our photographs. If you pick up our photographs, you'll see that you can't miss it from anywhere in this town. The 9-to-5 workday is dead, and employee experiences a lot more than ping pong tables and snacks, because tech companies are known for ping pong and snacks.
Yeah.
Right. but what they're saying really clearly is that, and I like the fact that they got ahead really early in this conversation and kind of laid down the gauntlet. This is how it's going to be. And they're going to spend, 6+ months or longer getting their workforce organized and getting the new tower that they just built and refurnished again. So it's an interesting perspective.
It's interesting that you mentioned those three examples from Salesforce, because I've recently been talking to some potential new clients, and many of them are saying, yeah, we're going to have everybody back in the office. Because one of my first questions are, is this position remote? Is there flex? And I can tell by their answers, to use your own words, if they've learned anything or not.
Right.
If everything, no, we're going to get everyone, put them all back in the office, then I know right off the bat, wait a minute, you haven't learned anything. It's been over a year and you've learned nothing.
Right.
So it's interesting that, what you said about Salesforce.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I very much appreciate, now, granted, they're a large company, they're a technology company, and, the vast majority of their people are knowledge workers and have the ability to work anywhere. But what I really appreciate is that they got really ahead of this early. They've been thinking about this for a very long time, and they were not shy about putting it out there. And the fact that they did it so publicly, I think, was really setting a bar, if you will, or really giving an example to other companies of what's possible if they really work at it. Now, I want to talk about, this is an important, and again, I'll provide the links to these documents. There's some really important work that's being already done in this area of work from anywhere, essentially. And as you see on the slide, and as your listeners on the radio will find in the handouts, there's a guy by the name of Raj Choudhury, who's a professor at the Harvard Business School. He teaches in the MBA program. He's been studying this for over 5 years. So he's not new to the party, meaning he just didn't start studying this in January of 2020. He's been doing it globally, studying it for the last 5 years. And he's done some really definitive writing about this. And I've really been pushing my clients to read this and even reach out to him to have conversations, because he is a big thinker. And what he uses, the terms are, work from home, or really, frankly, work from anywhere. And other people might use the term distributed working. So any of those three titles essentially mean that you would be not in the office, at least not routinely. And he's very clear about the benefits of this work from anywhere model. He said, just as you and I've talked about many times, Alex, about the cost of living, because people can live outside of urban centers, better quality of life, parks, and so on, much more flexibility. I thought this one was really interesting. The fourth bullet here says military or corporate spouses still able to pursue their own aspirations. And I'm sure you probably have known or met people whose either spouse was in the military or in a corporation, and they got a new job, and then everybody moved.
Yeah.
And then the job was lost. And so the spouse, often a woman, lost all of that background and then all of that seniority and got to get a new job, blah, blah, blah. And so I think that's actually a pretty good selling point myself. Also, for people that might be challenged with immigration issues. So, for example, in the United States, there's been lots of issues with the H-5B visas during the Trump administration. And so people that were supposed to come to the U.S. to work couldn't get them. But if you had, again, work from anywhere, you could be employing people that might be working some other place, but can't get here because of immigration related issues or disease, because now you can't get to a lot of places or move about. And also what's interesting, some of my clients that are in the global community like this last bullet, which is in some countries, it allows women to continue to work, even though in their culture, it's frowned upon to work outside the home. And so from a cultural perspective, they can actually work, but they're working remotely. So they're not leaving the home environment. And that can be a big help. And he also talks about that for organizations, there's actually a lot of benefits as well. You have the ability to have increased employee engagement, if you know how to do that. And we'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment. That workers are often happier. And they're also more productive. And you and I've talked a lot about that from our own personal experiences, as well as things that we've observed. Huge opportunity for real estate savings, of course, because you don't have people all with their own desk, all with their own cube, all with their own office. And so there is those savings from a real estate perspective. And then you really expand your pool. So as we've talked many times, it's not just people who like are in Toronto. You could be getting people to work from you from anywhere.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, the talent is the world. Okay, that's pretty good. And then lastly is that you
Which
have,
actually isn't a really new idea, because I've worked for financial institutions here in Canada where they outsourced
right,
some of their development to other countries, either in
right,
Europe or India or China
right,
or wherever.
right.
So that's not a new idea,
No, not at
like
all.
some people think it is new and novel, but it's actually been around for a while.
Right, exactly right. And so this would be what would be unique about this is you'd have an employee versus the company. So instead of when you outsource, you're outsourcing to a company usually, and they're doing all of that and providing you with a whole bunch of people. In this case, it's one person at a time, but they're
Mhm.
employees of yours. And then lastly, his belief is in and this is all based on his research he's been doing over the last 5 years, is that it reduces attrition because people are, for all the reasons that they're happy, are going to be staying in that job longer. And then lastly, he says societally, he believes that there are also some really great benefits. And one of them I think is fascinating is about brain drain, where you've got many people, especially in many parts of the world, where the only opportunity for a good job is often in the big city centers. And so you have people leaving small villages or small towns, and
Mm.
then they're actually literally draining all of that new knowledge and youth, if you will, and they're actually then going to a large urban center. And so people can work in more rural environments, again, assuming things like internet, et cetera, is successful. And then, of course, we're not driving as much or flying as much, and all of that can be good as well.
I just wanted to mention, I know I mentioned it to you earlier about the brain drain piece of getting jobs in cities, that now I don't know if this is happening anywhere around you where you live, but where I live, there are some smaller cities and large towns, London, Ontario, a fair sized city, Owen Sound north of me, Sudbury north of me, and a couple of other places. They're now promoting themselves to
Mm-hmm.
people that can't afford, the $1 million homes in the greater Toronto area, to say, hey, you can get the same $1 million home up here for half the price.
Right.
And we've got more parks and more land. You can go hiking and ride bike riding and everything. And there's so much to do. And they've invested in their infrastructure, especially with internet capabilities and
Mm-hmm.
those kind of things, to say, you know, if you're working from home, well, you know what? You can do that up here and live a
Yeah.
better quality of life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's there is actually a kind of a competition going on amongst these towns and cities now.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I'm not seeing that. Well, I'm seeing that a little bit. Actually, states are doing that here in the United States. But I live in one of the most expensive cities in the world, San Francisco, and where you can't buy a house for less than $1.5 million, and it's the size of a postage stamp. So yes, there have been a fair number of people that have left the city. Maybe as much as 10% of our population has shrunk in the last year because people are realizing, I could live anywhere and just work remotely for many of the companies I'm working for, like Twitter, like Facebook, like all these other technology companies, and they're doing that.
Mhm. On that note, we've come to the end of our second segment. We are talking with Regina Phelps today, and we will be right back. Welcome back. Today we are talking with Regina Phelps. Regina, you're talking about working from home everywhere. Can you continue on with that? I know we've only got so much time left and
Sure,
still lots
sure,
to cover.
sure. And again, this is Raj Choudhury's work from the Harvard Business School. And again, those links will be available on your site. He does mention a couple. So the last thing we just talked about was, of course, the benefits of this work from anywhere, as he describes it. But now he has to, well, what are the concerns of work from anywhere? And a couple things that he talks about is, first of all, the office has been something that we've had forever. So it's really hard for people to imagine getting rid of it. So there's this resistance, which you and I have talked about a lot. And because of it, that can be challenging automatically. And frankly, there can be some really legitimate hurdles to making working from anywhere work. Like, for example, if they don't have sufficient broadband or enough capacity, that would be an issue. But what's happened is that during this experiment we've been living in the last 12 months, is that the pandemic has taught us that all remote work is actually possible. And there are now a variety of best practices that are emerging, and I'm going to share some of those with you. It's based on his research. And he's felt that essentially what needs to be solved for a company to be able to successfully have work from anywhere, work from home, distributed working, whatever you want to call it, is that you have to figure out, how does communication work? How do people work together, such as brainstorming and problem solving, which normally might be when you drag people into a conference room and you brainstorm, etc. But how do you communicate effectively? How do you brainstorm? How do you problem solve? The second thing he talks about, which I think is really important, is knowledge sharing. And knowledge sharing is, for example, how do you share information about the company you work with other people? It's done spontaneously. So if my cube is next to yours and you want to know how to do something, you're just going to stop by and say, hey, Regina, how do you do X, Y, Z? But when everybody's remote, that's not possible. So how do you do that kind of basic knowledge sharing? And he has lots of ideas about how to do that. And then how do you really deal with all of the cultural issues? So, which is, how do you socialize? How do you get people brought on board? How do you keep them connected? How do you build a company culture, which is all about camaraderie? And how do you do that when you're remote? And then how do you mentor people? How do you successfully mentor people in the organization? And he believes that those are the things that have to be thought through for this to work. And if you think through it, you're going to be able to successfully make this happen. But if you don't, then there are going to be issues that are going to pop up. And the issues are about this. And you can see how this would happen. So for example, sometimes if a senior manager goes to work, then what do you think his direct reports are going to do? They're going to go to work, right? They're not going to work from home because they need FaceTime with their boss. Their boss expects them to be there. And so what begins to happen is that you have this kind of two-class society. And the way that Professor Choudhury talks about this is that the best hybrid model is that everybody does the same style of work, regardless of where your butt is in a chair. So for example, if I'm working from home and I'm using collaborative tools, if I'm in the office the next day, I'm still using the same collaborative tools. So that means that we don't have a class divide. That when you're in a conference room, and I'm sure this has happened to you, it's happened to me a zillion times, where you're on a conference call, you're in the room with everybody else, and there's 2 or 3 people on the phone. Those people are often trying to get a word in edgewise. They don't really understand all the sidebar conversations that are going on, blah, blah. And so that means that we have 2 classes, right? Yep. We have 2 classes. And so that doesn't work. So what makes the best possibility is you've got this remote work group who are working just like they're in the office, and vice versa. And so that's one key thing he talks about. The second thing he talks about is that if you actually have people that choose to be in the office versus those people that choose to be remote, then you also create another set of classes, because the remote people, again, are going to be not as much in the in crowd. They're not going to know as much because of the way it's designed. And then secondarily, the office workers are going to have the inside lane. And so what he talks about is that maybe what you say is that everybody's going to work in the office 2 days a week, but it's not decided that nobody says, okay, I'm going to work 3. No, you're going to work 2. We only need you here 2 days a week. So it's that idea. It's that idea. And so the idea is, if you think about remote work first and you build everything around the idea that it's remote, that when you're in the office, you're still working that way. So when you go into a conference room, you're all using a whiteboard that's on the computer. You're not using a whiteboard that's in a screen in a conference room. So the idea is that you're still using collaborative tools. You're still working the same way. It doesn't make any difference where you happen to be seated, to avoid that class society. What do you think of that?
I like that. And to be honest, that's kind of where I want to go. Because I've always enjoyed that mix, a couple of days in the office, a couple of days at home. It's kind of, I go to the office, I do all my meetings, and I get all the information I need, and then I can go home and actually get something done.
Right. And I think to that point, I mean, that's what Choudhury talks a lot about, is that You go to work to collaborate, because frankly, if you're just doing the work, you could be anywhere, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so
that's
you
true.
go to work for those reasons that you need to connect with other people, but not because you just need to have your butt in the chair, so to speak, right? So
Yeah.
it's really a different mindset. Now he talks about, and these are all really important things that he shares in his writing, which again I would highly recommend to your listeners. And this article is free online from the Harvard Business Review that came out in November, December of 2020. That he says what you really need to make all this work from anywhere work is you have to have really good new processes. So you have to really document how you get things done. Because again, we can't have those casual conversations with me sticking my head in your cube, right? So I've got to really have clear processes about how things are done. And we have to have really good training for collaborative tools. And I will tell you, most of my clients have done an awful job with this. So they, send out Slack, or they'd send out MS Teams and say, use this to collaborate. Look at the videos at the company website, go to Slack, go to MS Teams. Well, it's for a lot of people that are not tech folks, it's not very helpful. So
And
for you
some
to,
don't have time for that.
right, right. And so the idea is if you're going to launch a really important collaborative tool, you had better do some really good training with your staff. And it should be about you and your processes and how you expect it to work and how it should be organized. Because if I organize my team site completely different than you organize yours, and I'm going to collaborate with you and I go to your page, it's like, what's all this stuff? I mean, don't make it hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't make it hard. So if you're going to use collaborative tools, which of course I expect everybody would be, that they should be really thinking about how they can launch those effectively. You wouldn't launch a new product to customers and just say, hey, figure it out, No. So that's really important. And then I think the third one is really critical. And this is going to take some big chewing by management.
Just by reading this bullet point, I'll let you read it, but just as I read it,
How do you
wow.
define productivity?
Mm,
Because traditionally productivity was okay, you got your stuff done, and oh yeah, you worked 40 hours that week. Well, is that really productivity? And the answer, of course, it's not the number of hours that you work. It's really what your productivity is measured, should be measured on the outputs or the deliverables of your job. But I will be honest with you that a lot of knowledge workers don't necessarily have, I need to make 20 widgets an hour or whatever, right? I mean, it's a different kind of work. And so this means you have to reframe how you are looking at work and defining it. This is a meaty topic that requires HR professionals, executives, and leadership to really chew on. What does Regina do? What does Alex do? What does that job entail, and what is our expectation? Because frankly, Alex, if you can get the job done in 20 hours, and that's what's the deliverables are, you're supposed to work 40, well then that's it, right? You don't have to do another 20, right?
or
Right?
give me a promotion, something else to do.
Right, right. So this idea about what's productive is a lot more than with your butt in a chair in an office.
Yeah.
And what's expected and how do you measure that?
And we've got
So
4 minutes left.
there's this deep thinking. And then
Yeah.
lastly, what he talks about is the new position that should be in every office environment is head of remote work. Who thinks about this stuff all the time?
Interesting. That one's an interesting point.
It
I
is.
haven't heard anyone bring that up before.
I think it's critically important. And when you think about the things that need to happen, I think it's really spot on. So I have 4 minutes left, but the last slide is really important. And that is that senior leaders are often the biggest obstacles to a successful remote work from anywhere, work from home, distributed working.
Agreed.
And that's because they are often far more comfortable being in an office and having people around them. And I know this, I see this in my client population every single day. And so the slide says, remind senior leaders that the world is changing. And if you talk to people under the age of 40, their idea of this remote work and this collaborative environment is extremely different than somebody who's older in senior management. Has been my experience with my own clients. So the question is not that working from anywhere is possible, but really, what do you need to do to make it possible? And management is the answer to that. All senior leaders, if they go to work, then everybody else is going to go to work because it's all about FaceTime. But if senior leaders would support things such as synchronous and asynchronous communication, which means asynchronous communication means you're doing it offline, off time. So I might put something into a chat, you come to work, 5 hours later, you answer me. So it's not synchronous. How we do brainstorming, how we do problem solving, asynchronous ways are the ways to go. That we actually have initiatives to codify information online so that we all have this big knowledge sharing, that we encourage this virtual socialization, team building, and mentoring, that we really obviously deal very closely with data security, because with everybody remote, that's a big problem.
Yeah.
And that we work with government officials about regulatory compliance, which now we have people in many different locations, countries, or states. That can be an issue. And then lastly, they have to set an example, which means they have to work remotely too. They just can't come in 5 days a week because they want to. So there needs to be a real shift in what's going on here. And so I really encourage your listeners to really look at this information and share it widely with management.
It's interesting, that last point, senior management, making sure that they work remote. We've probably both been around long enough where it used to be senior management were the only ones who had the capability to work from home.
Right. Oh yeah. Right.
And now it's completely changed.
Right. So those are really important things for your listeners to think about, and go to your site, because I'll give you all these links.
Yeah, we'll put the links in the show description on Voice America, and it'll be in the description on the YouTube channel as well. So there'll be some links there for people to check out. And
Cool.
hopefully they do, because there is some really good information. And I know you and I are going to have to touch base on this again, I'm sure, because there is so much more, and I know we can get deeper into some of this information. Maybe we'll move some of that to next month.
Sounds good.
I know there's some stuff we didn't even get to today.
Right. Right.
As always.
Always. Yeah. We talk too much.
Hey, I'm all for it. I love it. The more people learn and listen, the better we're getting the messages out there. So,
Absolutely.
everyone benefits in the end. So thank you once again, Regina, for your insights. It's always a pleasure to chat with you.
You're welcome, Alex, and to you as well. And I hope you get a jab in your arm pretty soon, and I hope your mom does. So good luck.
Me too. Me too. Believe me. And hopefully she will in the next couple of weeks, if not sooner. Fingers crossed.
Absolutely.
So thanks, Regina, and to everybody listening and watching. Stay prepared, everybody. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave a message and let me know what your thoughts are. If you'd like to be a guest on the show to talk about something related to business continuity, disaster management, COVID, personal well-being, anything that's relatable to those subjects, you can reach me through my LinkedIn profile, which is in the video description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. In the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.